again and again and again. Do it again, do it again, do it again. Some time ago, my little grandson, Jude, I don't know where he gets his vocabulary from, but he sure can talk. One day he asked me, Papa, what is the meaning of sophomoric? And I sounded sophomoric in trying to explain it to him. But he saw his mother scurrying around the house looking for her car keys. Naomi's a wee little one. My good friend James Robeson is here. James and Betty, they're precious friends. They were such a vital part of this whole project too, in the procurement of this building. They know Naomi well. They've ministered to her over the years. She's just full of energy, and she stopped for a moment and said, I must be losing my mind. And young Jude walked up to her and said, Mommy, whatever you do, please don't ever lose your heart, because I am in there. Now, who taught that little one that? Who told him to say that? Where did that come from? When my daughter Sarah was only 2, we were crossing over from Jordan, across the West Bank into Israel. Never forget it. It was 1977. And at that time, you'd cross over the Allenby Bridge. I'm sure many of you here have done that. You'd spend about 2 hours standing in line, and people are restless. Sarah was being held in Margie's arms, and we'd prepared her for a long day. She was a little over 2. And at one point, she just looked around, and of course, the Israeli soldiers are armed to the teeth out there. She didn't know any better. She looked at one of these soldiers and said, Excuse me, sir, do you have any bubble gum? He was stunned. He took off his gun and gave it to a colleague and came over to Margie and put his arms out to Sarah. And she went to him. He took her into a back room. Now I began to get worried. And he came back 5 minutes later with a tray, 3 glasses of lemonade on them. One for little Sarah, one for my wife, one for me. And he waved us over, put us in his Jeep, took us to a taxi stand, and we were on our way through Jericho into Jerusalem. Sarah earned her whole keep in that one question. What is it that disarmed a man like that? What is it that caused a man just for a moment to forget the intensity of his role to keep guard? It was the voice of a little child and the innocence of that little child who had no clue what was really happening. And so when God looks at Rebekah and says to her, 2 nations are in your womb. You see, we live in time, which is a punctuated calibration of change for us. But God is unchanging. He lives in the eternal now. We often think we can accelerate the march of history by doing things in a way that probably even ought not to be done. And so when these boys were in the womb and she was told what their destinies were going to be, Rebekah thought she'd give God a hand, and move this thing along a little faster than God had in mind. God works at appointed times, and in those fulfillments of those times, God works and God does his marvelous bidding. So these 2 boys are born, and you can see the difference right from the beginning. One is going to be an outdoorsman, a hunter. The other is sort of going to be a quiet, pensive type personality. The father was the hunter type, and so he went for Esau as a preferred person in personality, and the mother was looking at Jacob because she had received the word of what the future was going to be like. Ladies and gentlemen, we come as a packaged unit. We cannot be carved up. That's the meaning of the very word individual. We cannot be divided up. We come as composites. We are unique. And when God fashions and frames us in our mother's womb, it is for a distinctive imprint on your life and mine. I sit here and listen to the musicians sing, and I marvel at voices like that. When I finish speaking, people ask me if I've got a cold. No, I haven't. This is a natural Nat King Cole voice that I have, you know. It's always husky. But I listen to music like that and I say, wow, it'd be wonderful, Lord, if you'd given me a little bit of that so that I could wake up every morning and just sing to myself and not get bored with my own voice. Here's what F.W. Borum, one of my favorite essayists, says. Brilliant, brilliant essay called The Sword of Solomon. May I read for you 3 or 4 paragraphs? F.W. Borum was an Englishman who ministered in Australia and New Zealand, died in the late 50s. He was also the favorite essayist of Ruth Graham, Billy Graham's wife. She and I often exchanged volumes on Borum's essays. Over 55 volumes of brilliant essays. I think the greatest English essayist that I have read. A man of God who pastored just 3 churches, and one of his books he dedicates to the 3 elect ladies. So beautiful with language. But here it is, the Sword of Solomon. Great was the wisdom of Solomon, for he demonstrated one day more vividly and dramatically than it had ever been demonstrated before the utter unreliability of mathematics on the higher planes of human experience. There is a sense, I suppose, in which twice 1 are 2, a sense in which 2 and 2 are 4, a sense in which many other propositions of this kind are partly, if not wholly, true. It is difficult to see how merchants and accountants and other excellent and well-meaning people could go back to their desks and counting houses if their faith in these arithmetical conclusions was seriously shaken. I hasten to say, therefore, that there is a plane of ledgers and cash books on which these propositions are approximately sound. But if you rise from that plane to a loftier one, you will find at once that they are quite untenable. They simply will not work. Solomon proves it at the city gate once and for all. It may be true that half a sovereign and half a sovereign make one sovereign. It is obviously untrue that half a baby and half a baby make one baby. Let the sword do its deadly work. Let it cleave this baby into 2 parts, and half a baby plus half a baby will represent but the grim and gruesome mockery of a child. 2 halves of a baby make no baby at all. On this higher plane of human sentiment and experience, the laws of mathematics collapse completely. When, for example, a man distributes his wealth among his children, he gives to each a part. But when a woman distributes her love among her children, she gives it all to each of them. I do not believe that any man who has once fallen in love will ever be persuaded that 1 and 1 are only 2. He looks at her and he feels that 1 plus 1 would make 1,000,000. I do not believe that any happy couple, into the sweet shelter of whose home a little child has come, will ever be convinced that 2 and 1 are only 3. Life has been enriched 1,000-fold by the addition of that one little life to theirs, and I'm absolutely certain that no pair from whose clinging and protecting arms their treasure has been snatched will find comfort in the assurance that 1 from 3 leaves 2. In the great crises of life, one's faith in figures breaks down hopelessly. In the great crises of life, one's faith in figures breaks down hopelessly. I met Margie in 1966. I was only 20. Married her in 72, 6 years later. We've been married now for 43 some years. My life was totally enriched in ways that numbers will not fully express. I know you share the same in the experience of your love, your romance, and the families that you raise. In the great crises of life, one's faith in figures breaks down hopelessly. There's a reality here of an indivisibility, and the parents made 3 blunders. Blunder number 1, they played favorites. One preferred one, the other preferred another. You see, 2 of the great longings of the human heart, one is for the greatest longing is for acceptance, and then the greatest fear is for rejection. Greatest longing is for acceptance, the greatest fear is for rejection. And then when you come to that acceptance, you want to be accepted not just because of what you can do, but how you see this individual as of intrinsic worth, essential worth, not given by state or government, but given by the fact that God himself has made you imago Dei, in the image of God. Our secular world today is cruelest with children. When we think of the millions that we obliterate in the womb, I shudder to think of what we will say to God. They tried to eliminate his very son as well. Wanted to do away with him. When we stand before God and say to him, why did you allow so much suffering, so much cancer, so much this, so much hepatitis, so much that? What will we say to God if God says, you know what? I sent a whole lot of people into your world to help you find cures for these. You wouldn't even allow them into your world. What would we say then? And I just say to you, the parents may have meant well, but the carving up of the favoritism was the first blunder that was really made. You know, Leighton Ford, Billy Graham's brother-in-law, was put up for adoption as a baby, and it was a long story. He told me this story personally. He was sitting in an airport and talking. We don't need to go into the details, but it was some 40 years later he tracked his mother down. It was a long story. She had very little choice at that point, I think. But he tracked her down. Leighton was born in Canada, and I think it was somewhere in St. Catharines or Chatham or something like that. And he got into the car on a snowy day. He'd connected with her. She was shocked. And he drove and drove all these miles, and the snow had fallen. It was just a carpet of white, and the trees were just glistening with that snow. He didn't know if he was going to find the house. But as he was approaching the neighborhood and slowed down, he noticed an older woman standing outside under a tree. And he pulled over and realized she was looking for him. He pulled into the driveway, and he looked at her, and he said, I'm Leighton. And the mother couldn't handle it. She hadn't seen him since she'd handed him over as a little baby. And Leighton told me when he was leaving and gave her a big hug, he said, I hold nothing against you, Mom. I just want you to help me with one question. What best can I do for you? She said, just love me. Just love me. Because after all the years of what she'd done and the struggles of wondering where he was, who he was, and what had happened to him, she had no idea. He was a worldwide evangelist and had married Jeannie, Billy Graham's sister, and was touching the globe with his message. We have no idea what goes on, but I just want you to know you are made in an indivisible way. God has put you together. Your DNA is unique. Thank him for the way he has made you, and tell him to take away the rough edges and sharpen the finer points and be a blessing to the world as only you can be in your unique way. Nobody can replace you. Secondly, there was a breakdown of communication. When Esau married the wrong person, it says twice in Scripture, in 26:34 and 28:6 in Genesis, that he didn't know how much he had upset his parents by doing that. But somewhere the communication had broken down. I have realized in my own life how important it is to talk to your kids at the right time and to say the right thing, especially in terms of marriage. Who you marry, and I will say this as bluntly as I can, you'll make either your heaven or hell on earth, depending on the person you marry. Because you see, that's one relationship from which you can never take a vacation. It's there. It's 100% commitment. There's no vacation from it. And it'll either bring you the greatest thrill or be the greatest heartache. Esau ended up in those miserable relationships and said he didn't know how much he'd hurt his parents. Find the right time, say the right thing. Thirdly and quickly, they taught him through deception. The mother made him go and take hold of that blessing in a way where he had to deceive his father in order to claim that blessing. And what did she teach her son? You do this in your own way, in your own time, surreptitiously. you'll gain it by deceit. There's actually one major religion in the world where deceit is a virtue. I'll let you guess which one. They praise deceit. It's virtuous if you can deceive, especially the enemy, and make all kinds of pretenses so that you can get exactly what you want. Deception in contract, deception in treaties. Deception is a virtue. It's a virtuous thing if you can deceive the person you're trying to overcome, because all of life in that system is a war. It's a struggle. And so they go forward with that virtue of deception. There's a story told, somebody just wrote to me recently, and a little boy told his dad, would you please go with me tomorrow? The school is having a small gathering. So the father says, how small? He says, the principal, you and me. I used to be invited to a lot of those small gatherings. Maybe my father, I didn't have the courage to tell my dad. If I weren't sick by then, he'd make me sick at that point. This father is called up by a principal in India and told your son, because his son was being suspended constantly. So the father said, why are you always suspending him? They said, because he's stealing things. So what is he stealing? Pencils, pens, erasers, paper clips, reams of paper from the school. And he says, I don't know why he would do that. I could bring all of those things from the office for him. And as soon as he said that, he realized what he'd done. He'd put his imprint upon his son and trained him to think that way. And so it goes, from favoritism to the breakdown of communication to deception, and the boy's on the run. Jacob's on the run. And he knows he's going to run for a long time to come. But while he's running, he sets this pillow down with a stone for his pillow. And he's sound asleep, and God speaks to him in a dream. And when he wakes up from that dream, he said he was going to call that place Bayit El, the house of God. He didn't know God was there even while he was running. Your first step, when everything has gone wrong or things have gone wrong, your first step will always begin in communion with the living God. Communion with the living God. You know, if you're told to meditate and sit and chant mantras and look inwards and all of that, then you've just got a capital I. The reason in the pantheistic worldview they don't really pray, technically they cannot pray. They have to meditate because they are part of the ultimate reality. There's no I-U. There's only one big capital I. So they look inwards. There's union with the impersonal absolute. That's the goal. Not so in the Christian faith. There's communion with the living God. And dare I tell you, the Judeo-Christian faith is the only combination of teaching which calls you to communion with the living God. In pantheism, it's union. In the other major monotheistic, you will never ever think of talking about communion with God. It would be a blasphemous statement to them. But God calls you and me to break that bread and to drink that cup and to do that in remembrance of me. Christ in you, the hope of glory, that indwelling presence that came and tabernacled in the world offers to tabernacle within you. You and I are the temple of the living God, communion with God. And he says, you know what? I didn't know. God was right here. This passage influenced the great poet Francis Thompson, who was a drug addict, was on opium, though given a genius mind and applied to Oxford, was turned down 2 or 3 times because he couldn't shake his opium habit. He would live in 2 places, at Charing Cross, hanging out with the losers and the lost, buying his drugs, selling pencils, bootlaces, and all of that, to buy the drugs to keep that habit going as an addict. At night, he would wrap his dirty raincoat around him in the chill nights and sleep by the River Thames, Charing Cross and Thames, Charing Cross and Thames. He's the one who wrote, I fled him down the nights and down the days. I fled him down the arches of the years. I fled him down the labyrinthine ways of my mind. And in the midst of tears, I hid from him. And under running laughter, adown titanic glooms of fear, up vista'd hopes I spread, running from those strong feet that followed after. But one of his greatest pieces of poetry was called The Kingdom of God. He wrote this: O world invisible, we view thee. O world intangible, we touch thee. O world unknowable, we know thee. Inapprehensible, we clutch thee. Does a fish soar to find the ocean? An eagle plunge to find the air? Do we ask of the stars in motion if they have rumor of thee there? Not whether wheeling systems darken or our benumbed conceiving soars. The drift of pinions would we hearken. Beats on our own clay-shuttered doors. The angels keep their ancient places. Touch but a stone and start a wing. 'Tis ye, 'tis your estranged faces that amiss the many splendored thing. But when so sad thou canst not sadder, crying upon thy so sore loss, shall shine the traffic of Jacob's ladder between heaven and Charing Cross. Yea, in the night, my soul, my daughter, cry clutching heaven by the hems, lo, Christ walking on the water, not of Gennesaret, but Thames. Imagine that. The same imagery of the ladder was given in the New Testament as well, as the Son of Man and the angels ascending and descending. Communion with God. God will track you down no matter how far you run, if you will only pause long enough to know He's nearer to you than you realize. They talk about the hiddenness of God. We need to talk a lot more about the obviousness of God. He's here, and He's like the hound of heaven, keeps following you, following you, following you. I can guarantee you that this room will never end with testimonies tonight if we opened up the microphone to say how God met us in a place where we never ever dreamed He would catch up with us. Of all the places I never dreamed of meeting God was on my bed of suicide when I was 17 years old. He followed me right to that bed. Whenever I go to Delhi, I always rent a taxi alone, and I go and park in front of the hospital. It used to be called Wellington Hospital then. It's not called Ramnath Lohia Hospital or something like that. I park in front of that, and I just look in there, and I say, Lord, this is where it all happened? When I was just 17. God is following you. If you're running from Him today, stop. He's got a ladder towards you, and He wants you to look up and know He's trying to get you to commune with Him. Communion with God. Secondly, reunion with his brother. You know, he's running from Laban, his father-in-law. He's messed up there too. All kinds of things happened out there. And now he's made up somehow, and he's running, but the story is quite intricate. And now he's got to meet up with Esau. Esau's the hunter. Jacob wasn't quite with muscles like watermelons. And so he's going to meet up with Esau. And you know, in India, they say, never go empty-handed to visit a friend, and even more so visiting an enemy. You always have something in your hand. They always bring you sweets. In Hindi, they say, muh meetha karna hai. Sweeten them out. Sweeten them out. So being a big tray of sweets. And oftentimes, the larger the tray, you say, oh, what apology is coming now? You know, what's going on? But that's probably exaggerated. They do it at all of their festivals. They do it to be courteous. Half of my suitcase's weight when I go overseas is gifts to people. My mother brought me up that way, and I do have some regrets because I arrive with all these gifts and sometimes see I forgot my socks or my pajamas or something like that because it already weighed so much. And so this boy's got all the gifts he's sending ahead to Esau. He's softening him up before he gets there. When he meets up with Esau, you know what Esau says to him at one point? Or he says to Esau, when Esau forgives him, you know what he says? I see in your face the face of God. He'd betrayed him. He'd cheated him. And now, when he says he sees in Esau the face of God, here's the important thing that I think you and I need to remember, and it is this, that first he'd seen his own heart, because he'd prayed to God and said, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. And God said, what is your name? Why? He thought God knew everything. He doesn't even know his name? No. Because when he stole the blessing from a blind father, he lied about who he was. Yeah, that whistle is right. Now he is before an all-seeing God, and God says, all right, I'll bless you. Who are you? He says, you've got me. My name is Jacob. God says, I will make a great nation out of you. This nation will never be great until it recognizes the sin that is in our own heart and calls ourselves truthfully as God sees us. That is the first step in any revival and any turning to, when we see our hearts the way God sees us. The arrogance that we see today, the hubris, the pride, the know-it-all, and the more we think we know, the more humiliated we get on the world scene. Only when we acknowledge before God how weak and impoverished we are, can God really turn to start helping us. Communion with God, reunion with your brother. I want to challenge you. Is there somebody with whom you're at loggerheads today? There's only one thing you can do. Get a hold of that person and say, look, I'm sorry for whatever my part is in this. You tell me what it is. I will take the blame, and I want to rebuild this relationship. Have you ever sat at a table where two hostile people are trying to make up? Try going to the Middle East today and be a bridge builder, my goodness. We sat across the table, 5 of us, from one of the sheikhs, I won't name him, who spoke at Yasser Arafat's funeral. He was such an angry man. And the Archbishop of Canterbury, who took 5 of us sitting across the table talking to him, at one point I just wanted to close my ears and say, we are really not here just to listen to you. We're hoping you'll even give us a little bit of a hearing. The anger, like a volcano of fire and brimstone spewing out, until one is willing to say, I'm sorry, let's talk, let's build. We will always be killing each other for land and position and power and prestige. The tensions in the Middle East go back for millennia after millennia because of the logic of unforgiveness. Communion with God, reunion with the brother, and lastly, the transference of the trust to the next generation. You know, there comes a time, I wrote this down one day, and I told it to my son. I said, son, there comes a time in life when the energy needed to perpetuate the convictions held in a family demand the strength of a younger mind. Can I repeat that for you? There comes a time in life when the energy needed to perpetuate the convictions held in a family demands the strength of a younger mind. For those of you who are in your younger years here, and your values have come to you from your parents who love God and who serve God, it'll be your responsibility to perpetuate those convictions and carry them forward. Vitally important that you carry the torch and carry the flame forward. So when I looked at those thousands of young university students, there's a tough world. What are we seeing in politics today? What are we seeing? We're seeing the product of the 70s and 80s of the Ivy League school radical liberalism. That's what it is. The radical liberalism, where all establishment is to be thrown away and the extreme left position is to be perpetuated. You see, if we go into politics, we only talk about right and left. We forget there's an up and a down. That's what God calls you and me to the up and the down. And we must transfer the trust to the next generation. Whether you're doing it at the dinner table, or whether you're doing it while you're watching a ball game, or whether you're doing it by the side of a loved one and their bedside. You know, even as I'm speaking to you, my mother-in-law is 96 years old. She has 4 daughters. I'm married to her daughter, Margie, number 2. Margie would have actually been here, but she wanted so much to come as well. But she's in Toronto because her mother, 96, was hit by a car 3 days ago and is now in bed in a pretty bad way. pretty bad way. But you know, for a mother to be that senior in her years and see her daughter standing around the bed, to love her and be there for her. Margie didn't even bat an eyelid. She packed her bags, and the next morning she was on a plane from Atlanta, and she went to Toronto. One other daughter, they're all around there. Young people, you have a responsibility. What did they say? Child is father to the man. You become the parents of the next generation and this generation. Jacob gathered his family around and instructed them and passed it on. Communion with God, reunion with brothers, transference of the trust. I want to close with a prayer by Michel Quist, the French mystic. I want you to give me your undivided attention. It's a powerful prayer. I have fallen, Lord, once more. I cannot go on. I will never succeed. I'm ashamed and I don't dare look at you, Lord. And yet I've struggled, for I knew you were right near me, bending over me, watching. But temptation blew in like a hurricane, and instead of looking at you, I turned my head away. I stepped aside, while you stood silent and sorrowful, like the spurned fiancé who sees his loved one carried off by his rival. When the wind died down as suddenly as it had arisen, when the lightning ceased after proudly streaking the darkness, all of a sudden, Lord, I found myself alone, ashamed, disgusted, with my sin in my hands. This sin that I selected as a customer selects his purchase. This sin that I've paid for but cannot return because the storekeeper is no longer there. This tasteless sin, this odious sin, this sin that now sickens me, that I once wanted but I want no more. Lord, I imagined, sought, played with, fondled for a long time. And I finally embraced while coldly bypassing you. I embraced that sin. My arms outstretched, my eyes and heart irresistibly drawn. This sin that I've grasped and consumed with gluttony. It's mine now, but it possesses me as the spider web holds captive the fly. It's mine, sticks to me, flows in my veins, fills my heart. It has slipped in everywhere as darkness slips into the forest at dusk and fills all the patches of light. I cannot get rid of it. I run from it like the master of an unwanted and mangy dog, but it catches up with me and rubs joyfully against my legs. Everyone must notice it. I'm so ashamed, Lord, that I feel like crawling to avoid being seen. I'm ashamed of being seen by my friends. I'm ashamed of being seen by you, Lord, because you loved me, but I forgot you. I forgot you because I was thinking only of myself, and one can't think of several persons at once. One must choose, and I chose. But now your voice, your look, your love, they hurt me, they weigh me down. They weigh me down more than my sin. Lord, please don't look at me like that, because I'm naked and dirty, down and shattered with no strength left. I dare make no more promises to you. I can only stand bowed before you. Come on, son, look up. Isn't it mainly your vanity that is wounded? If you loved me, you would grieve, but you would trust me. Do you think that there's a limit to my love for you? Do you think for a moment I have stopped loving you, but you still rely on yourself, son? You must rely on me. Ask my pardon and get up quickly. You see, it's not falling that is the worst, but staying on the ground. If you've fallen and you're sitting here saying, Ravi, that's me. I've stumbled. I've embraced sin in a way I never dreamed of doing it. And like that unwanted and mangy dog, it rubs up against my legs. It fills in my heart like darkness fills the patches of night, light at dusk. If you've got that reality in your mind, God's telling you to get up. You know what's even better? He gets you up. He gives you that energy, just like Ezekiel, Son of Man, stand up, and the Spirit of God entered into me and stood me up. God will give you that. You could be a man or woman of God as He has designed you to be if you will only trust Him and believe that He wants to make your life the best for which He intended. As you begin this new year, why not make a new start? And I'm going to pray with you. Father, you have spoken to us tonight, I have no doubt. Lord, I'm equally certain you have spoken on the other meetings here, knowing just your servants who have ministered. Your word never returns empty, but accomplishes that for which it was sent forth. How can I thank you, Father, for giving me the privilege of standing on the platform behind the pulpit of this great congregation? You have blessed me and blessed my life through these men and women. We thank you for it, Lord, and you know that comes from our hearts. But most importantly, Father, tonight there are those who need you individually. And ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to make this long. I don't want to make this long, but if I'll take just 1 minute. If God has spoken to you and you know you have to do business with him, I'm not planned on doing this, but I think I'd like to, for just 1 minute, you stand up where you are, and I'd love to close this meeting in prayer for you as you take this stand. Yes, God bless you. God bless you. See several standing right at the back and upstairs, on my right here, further on my right. Right. Don't be fearful. You're standing before the sovereign Lord who can transform your heart. Would you do that? Would you do that? If you're nervous to stand alone, just tell the person next to you, will you please stand with me? I need to get things right now. Just stand up quickly. Take another 30 seconds more. Thankfully waited. I want to talk especially to you young men. Will you begin this new year with a commitment that you're going to be a pure-hearted